California Grange that says that you,
We don't have anything in our packet that
No,
says-
they're all in court. That's why we're dealing with the state deputy.
so your argument is that you have documentation stating that from the state Grange that you are in good standing.
And
It
this-
doesn't matter what the national says because you're saying California.
They're having a war right now with National,
Okay.
and the courts, California courts say state is independent from them. In fact, she put the number of the state in there if you want to look it up, the war that's going on.
Right.
It's very lengthy.
Okay, and then and I appreciate, Mr. Walcott was passionate to try and eliminate, embarrassment and all that, but
Yes, we
what you're
need to.
saying here is that you feel that you have the documentation saying you're in good standing.
Yes.
You're saying that
Yes.
the rules say it isn't the fair manager's position.
Yes,
And you're also obviously willing to accept the consequences if your
Yes.
entrant does get
yes.
disqualified.
Just as a quick sideline, this
Okay.
is,
I just have another question.
Sure.
So then, you also mentioned a Bob that you said it says state, but he's really from national.
there are
That's
two
North
Bobs.
Bob Klaus, National, Bob McFarland State.
So we have to make sure that those two are not interchanged.
So you're saying in our packet, there's a letter from one of the Bobs that has,
The email that was distributed came from Bob Klaus, and he is the national, he's the deputy director in the state of California, but he represents National Branch. And he is the one who also came here, went to the fair board, and proceeded, when he actually did not have any right to do so. Because National is not allowed to have any interference, per the Superior Court of California, to have any interference with any activities, dealings, or otherwise with any Grange in the state of California. And he came in here and proceeded to do this.
okay. And then, so you're saying that if you submit your entries, it shouldn't be up to the fair manager, it should be, there's another method to protest.
There is.
Were the entries ever received?
Yes, all the entries were received.
Okay, so other people would have the ability to know they were received
If
and protest.
anyone can go into the fair office and ask the fair staff.
But I thought they were denied. Wasn't
No,
that the issue?
they were denied as Grange members.
Okay,
The girls were told that they would not allow me as signature to sign off as a Grange youth member.
so but I mean, nobody would really protest their being, entering the animals as Standish Grange because they didn't enter the animals.
Exactly. No one at that time of entry would have protested the entry as such. Because everything was done in a timely fashion, all time frames were met. The adults had their entries in, also in a timely fashion, so all time frames were met.
So basically, what you're saying is that you have things from the state saying you're in good standing, and although Jim has obviously the best intention of the hurt feelings and all that, legally it's not his call.
According to this, no, his own rule, number 20, it is not his call.
Go on to the livestock one. There's another line there.
Okay, well, if that's the case, great. I'd just be interested to hear if that is not the case, I guess. Thank you.
I know Jim Chapman has a question or comment, but Jim Walcott, might hear from you first. Do you have something that?
Yeah, I would say we probably wouldn't be here if it wouldn't have been for the 22nd. Both these ladies were at the meeting. I had a meeting with Dawn outside the office with Ann, and I told them how I wanted to do it. We wanted to go independent because it's best for the kids. She agreed.
I said independent Grange.
No,
And we have said independent Grange from the get-go.
that's not true. Sue, you were at another meeting with us with
I
my
have been
livestock.
at every livestock meeting that I've been able to attend and all the exhibitor meetings. And as of May 29th, you had written it down on your tablet that you would talk to the fair board regarding letting the kids show as Grange members. You wrote it down on your tablet. And then I received an email the following morning absolutely denying anything. So, that's probably what got this started. You know, it says right in here, to be eligible to show projects as Grange Youth Fair Program, this is Lassen County Fair rules. To be eligible, an individual must be a member of good standing, they are, of either a junior Grange or a community Grange for at least 6 months prior to the opening day of the fair.
Right now, California State Grange is an independent Grange. And we are subordinate below. They're our mother superior. We are a subordinate as an independent Grange until this lawsuit between national and state is settled.
Now, we have, our girls, when they went to take in their entries, had even developed a waiver to say that they could hold the fair, no harm, not responsible, if they were allowed to show, and there was a protest, that it would be dealt with between the Granges.
I mean, that in itself seems a bit strange. I mean, now, what would be the reason you have the waiver? Is it because?
Because of the issues that had been prior to them entering.
With the lawsuit?
Yes.
Between national and state?
Yes. And it was to hold no one at harm if the girls decided to, you know, to show as Grange members. That was not allowed. They were not allowed to enter as Grange members, or the waiver didn't hold any water, so we proceeded from there.
Jim, you have a question or comment
Well,
for Susan or for?
Yeah, I have several questions, actually. And I'd like to back up because it was interesting, a comment that was made by Ms. Holder in her initial presentation when she was talking about the California Grange and talking about the California, the Honey Lake Valley Grange's authority is based on the fact that it has this charter or whatever, the endorsement of the California Grange, that if the California Grange is suspended, then their legitimacy is equally
Yes,
challenged.
we're all
And-
null and void.
Well, I mean, and that assertion being made is a two-edged sword.
Yes, it
Because if indeed that's what it's about, then that's, I guess, what it's about. I think, first of all, it's not appropriate for the county to be in a position where it's being whipsawed between these rival interests within this other organization. And as far as I'm concerned, for us to even be deliberating as to who is the legitimate authority and who has legitimate ties, either they're all are legitimate or they're all not legitimate. And if they're having these other issues, that's something totally outside of the scope of the fair operation or the county or the community. And they need to resolve that through their own process. So I think that's one thing. But I'd like to zero in on it, is the Superior Court order that keeps being referred to. Is that a final order, or is that a temporary stay order until the court can sort out all the various facts?
Temporary stay order,
Temporary
status
stay.
quo.
Okay, and so I think because of that, to utilize the court order as being this finite thing that provides legitimacy, where basically what the court is dealing with is putting everybody into, frozen animation, I guess, until they can sort that
Right.
out. And I think that that's a process that the court needs to deal with. And there again, I think it makes it impossible for us to be able to do it, and so to do anything other than waiting for that court order to be done. So to
No.
make it a final thing that's saying that the court has said now that California is independent of the national, can do their own thing and can be functioning within the confines of what that court is doing. Of course, that court's jurisdiction doesn't reach into Lassen County, that's wherever else is in the state. And so then that brings me to the other question that I think has to be addressed, maybe Mr. Walcott can address this, is the adults versus children. Because apparently at one point, there was some paperwork put in for some adults to participate, and then when it came down to it with the animal issue, now all of a sudden, hey, no, we can't do this. Obviously, and I think that's a question I think Ms. Holder raised, was the legitimacy. Well, if the kids can't do it, why can the adults do it? There has to be a consistency, not only between adults and the kids, and obviously, if it's not okay for the kids to participate, then obviously whatever sort of extended consideration by the adults were made, that needs to be withdrawn. But then again, if it becomes a question between the other Granges within the state versus this Grange, what makes it kind of hard for me to, I guess, to process is I belong to a number of fraternal organizations, so I'm familiar with the structure. I haven't been involved with the Grange.
Would you like to join?
Well, I can give you between 2 and 3 a.m. in the morning probably would be
Okay.
the last allocated time
We're up.
block I have.
I'll be
But-
there.
But the point being is, having the familiarity, and I think from reading the history, and I appreciate what you put in the packet, that was very interesting to read the history of the Grange, is not uncommon from, the various, the Elks, or the Moose, or the Oddfellows, or the Masons, or, all the different groups that are out there function in the same fashion. In a lot of cases, they have an international structure, and then they have a national structure, and then you'll have like your state jurisdiction. So some organizations will be structured that way. Yours is basically a national state with the subordinate local ones. But to be honest with you, for any of the state structures to operate independent of their national authority, okay, Grange wasn't started by the California State Grange. Grange was started by this guy back in 1867 in Washington, D.C. So the national authority, pending the court sorting out the order, is the predominant body. So no matter what the state folks say in terms of asserting themselves, I can tell you right now, if I look at it, it'd be like you have the national government and the state government and local government. And so if the national government suspends the state government and says, no, you can't do that, whether it's funding or whatever, and the state says, to heck with the feds, we're going to do it our way. And we're actually seeing that take place now with the marijuana laws. The national guy says, no, you can't. The state guys say, yes, you can. And we're caught trying to administer it. And as far as I'm concerned, as much as I want to adhere to what the state says, the federal laws trump the state laws. And so in this case, I think the directions, if I had to weigh the Bob state guy versus Bob the national guy, I'm sorry, Bob the national guy outranks Bob the state guy. No matter what Bob the state
Even
guy
though
says.
we're an independent Grange.
It has no bearing on it. The fact you use the term Grange is a courtesy extended to you from the day that guy back in February of 1867, or April 4th, whatever the date was in 1867, conceived this idea and this program. And as the successor people from that day down to this point, the fact they give you a charter, they give you a standing, a certificate of good standing saying that you're a part of it, and irrespective of what the state does, the national folks have paramount control. And I think that's part of what the court is apparently trying to sort out. Now what the court did is it told the national guys, you just can't implement a death penalty and chop off the state guys without some sort of due process. And I think that's what the court is trying to resolve, maybe whatever that other dispute is. But in the interim, as far as we're concerned, I think from the county's point of view is, I think at this point, from just reading all this literature, I don't think we have any choice but to step back and not recognize any of this Grange stuff until they get sorted out.
May I just offer a rebuttal to Mr. Wolcott? He says that all the Granges and all the fairs all are on the same page. I beg to differ with you. The California Grange News just came out. We were unable to get it here for you to look at. However, a brand new Grange was just started in Southern California. They had their mid-winter fair, and they had their Grange kids. Their fair manager allowed those kids without a charter to show. So, not all.
That may be so, but I would ask the question, was that guy even aware of, that fair manager aware of these underlying disputes?
Yes, because one of our problems is, we have had a charter. It's a charter. It's just sitting there in limbo with the Franchise Tax Board right now. And National will not release it because of the war with the state of California.
So we are a chartered Grange.
Yeah,
We
and
are a
and
chartered
I
Grange.
respect
I
that.
can't bring it in because National's holding it.
Yeah, I respect that, but the bottom line is National is the body that controls the
Ew,
process.
they're so vindictive.
The National?
Yes.
We had one more speaker.
That's not
Yeah.
that's not my problem.
I know, it's
Ashley,
mine.
come on.
We're gonna go ahead and I'm gonna continue to take comments.
Okay.
And we'll, if there are any further.
We have one more speaker.
Well, I'd like to ask Mr. Walkup if you could answer that last question, that is this adult versus child thing, because obviously there's an inconsistency there.
What?
The fact that adults are being allowed to participate as Grange, but the children aren't, I mean.
It For me, it was about the money, but it was a staff error because I didn't let the staff know when they came in. That-
So is that error being corrected by rescinding the
Yes.
authorization, so the adults are not gonna be allowed to participate either?
so,
Okay, well, that was my question, because you can't have both answers, you have to have one or the other. So at this point, you're not gonna allow the adults then to participate. Okay, that's all I needed to know.
Anybody else in the audience?
We have youth that would like to speak.
We'd love to hear from Annie. Good morning.
Good morning. Hello, everyone. My name is Ashley Corbett. I've been a member of Spanish Grange for about a year. When my friends and my leaders came to me and started talking to us about a Grange, I was actually really excited to try something new and kind of get my name out further in the community and represent something more than just 4-H. My beef leaders from Standish talked to me about taking lambs for Grange and also my lambs for 4-H, or like steers for 4-H. I attended monthly meetings. The guy from state came. He gave us an oath. Jim was at the meeting that night, and he saw that Katie from state said that we were really a Grange. So we were like official. I picked out my lambs, got them tagged and entered. The whole time Jim kept saying that we weren't a Grange. But he'd been to that meeting, saw that we took the oath, and that we were given the title of Spanish Grange. My leader, Sue, kept telling me that we were a Grange and to keep that in mind and not to give up. I don't want to show as an independent because I'm worried about not being treated equal in the cellar at auction. I don't want to be looked at as just a kid trying to make a profit. I want to be looked at as a kid who's trying to support her community and really put my name out there. I really hope that you guys allow me to sell as a Grange member, or at least show as a Grange member, because this is my last year. I'm gonna go to college next year, and this is my last hoorah in the community. So I hope you guys take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you for taking the time to come this morning. Is there anybody else in the audience wishing to address the board on this item? Anybody have any questions or comments? Eileen, you have to take your question or comment.
No, I'm just, after listening to Jim, I'm thinking of something local, that we have a Lassen Humane Society, but they are of no affiliation to either the state or the national or international Lassen or Humane Society. And yet, they're just as legitimate as any other humane society in the world. We treat them as just as legitimate, yet they're not, they've taken the name, but they're not part of any, they're not affiliated, thank you, with anything higher than that. And yet we treat them as legitimate humane society. No, I just want to throw that out because,
Are humane societies fraternal organizations? I
No.
think what we're talking about is fraternal
Yeah,
organizations
but we
having
have
that
a-
hierarchy.
but we have a humane society that's not affiliated with anybody.
Well, and that may be so, but I don't think the humane societies function, if I can, Mr. Chairman, respond, as a fraternal organization. We have a historical society, but the historical societies are not fraternal organizations. I think that's the issue here. There's a big difference in terms of the type of organizational structure. And I mean, and that's a fraternal organization. There's rights and privileges that emanate from a central authority. Humane societies are decentralized. And, you know, I mean, historical societies are Friends of the Library. I mean, they're a lot of community-based organizations, but they may have one thing in common, and that is the fact they use like a name like Humane Society for a particular geographic area. There's no
Who's
connection.
in charge, Who's in charge? He's leaving.
The Vice Chairman.
Maybe I should state that Mr. Hanson, chairman of the board, has had to leave. I am vice chairman, and I will be taking over.
So I think, I mean, obviously that's a good observation, but I think the merit of it though is that, we're talking about fraternal organizations. You have like the Masons or the Elks or the Oddfellows. Those organizations, the charters they have are issued by either a national organization or a Grand Lodge of a state jurisdiction that has the authority in that area, independent of anyone else. So,
Am I mistaken, or is all of the Grange, because of this lawsuit, all of the Granges are in limbo?
Well, to be honest with you, if the
Yes.
National Grange says that California's in suspension, and unless the National Grange formally bypasses any subordinate Grange, state Grange, and directly confers upon a local Grange, that would be the only clear-cut way. So the other Grange or any other Granges here, if their existence is dependent upon the California State Grange, which is now in suspension, you know, not only is the state in suspension, but all the subordinate Granges of that state would be in suspension as a result. I mean, I know, as an example, back in the early 80s, I was very active in the Kiwanis Club, and we had what we call the Key Club and the Kiwanis Club, which was for the youth in the schools. And so at that time, women were not allowed to be members of Kiwanis. It was a male organization. So we had a very large group here, and we had a deputy district attorney who was a lady, and anyway, so her name was Renee Roberts, and so Renee is a female name, but it can also be a male name, and so the club brought her in as a member and made her a member and sent it in, and they kind of chortled that we had, even though the international rules of Kiwanis said no. Rotary was the same way, all of them.
They actually said no women?
No women, yeah, it was a male organization. Now, because of some Supreme Court decisions that came down, all of those bodies had to change it, and now women are members as well as men. But at the time, that wasn't the case. So we had inducted this female into our role, contrary to our international rules. And when one of our older members was unhappy about the deceit of this group that was running the club at the time, filed a complaint with Indianapolis. And Indianapolis took notice and sent a note saying, is it true? And of course, obviously, they responded, yes, we did induct this lady into our club. And they were ordered to cease and desist and basically throw her out of the club. And the club said, no, we're not going to do that. And the international says, okay, fine, then we're going to remove your charter. But the penalty was that by removing not only our charter, the two subordinate youth group charters that were dependent upon us being a member were going to be lost. So our club had to face the dilemma, do we go independent, which we can, or do we adhere to, bow down to these requirements that are imposed by the international organization and kick the lady out of the club and keep the youth charters? Well, the club blew up, and we went from 70 members down to about 15 members, and they kept the charter and they kept the kids, and they rescinded the membership of the female member. Now, 5 years later, at the International Convention, they changed the rules and women became a member. But by that time, the damage was, it destroyed the club. But there again, that's an example of where you have this hierarchy of responsibility. So, whether it's a service club or a fraternal organization, they do have that. Now, the humane societies don't operate with that kind of a hierarchy, and that's the difference.
I have a question
Wait.
for,
Yeah.
I think we're getting off track.
no, we're not. Reason I asked him that is that it seems like you've recognized that or understand that all the California charters have been suspended. It just seems to me logical, either you accept all the Granges or you accept none of them.
Well, to be honest with you, that would be my take on it now. What I'm hearing, though, is that the Superior Court has stayed that kind of death penalty implementation by the national organization to the state organization pending the review by the state. So the charters that were in place, I would say that would be the one caveat because of that court thing. But unfortunately, as been indicated in the paperwork submitted by Standish Green, they're caught in this limbo where the reactivation or the re-recognition of their charter, is caught between this feud. And had this been worked out a year ago and the charter for Standish Grange had been returned and had been normal, then they would not be affected.
But like you said, what you did, we chose to become independent Grange along with the California State Grange. We are an independent Grange,
Okay.
period.
Let's move on.
Okay.
All right. Something Mr. Wolcott said regarding the adults and that his fair staff didn't understand. In the Fair Board chambers, at several meetings and also during several exhibitor meetings, it was brought out that the Standish Grange adults would be submitting entries. We talked about the scarecrow, the garden, and the fair booth, and at no time was it ever discussed or said, no, you can't do that. with Mr. Wolcott in attendance. He has agreed that that it was, going to be okay for us to enter as adults.
Okay, thank you. Lisa?
I just want to clarify here real quick, because y'all just lost me on this. He's saying that because national is out of whack, the state is, because he's right, you're higher up, you have your subordinates underneath. National and state of California are fighting, therefore whatever's under the state of California is numb. There's nothing going on, correct? Is that kind of what you're trying to say?
What I'm saying is that whatever is happening below the state level is in suspension until the national, because the authority to use the name Grange is something that it emanates from that national organization. You could be Club XYZ or ABC, but you just can't be Grange because it's national that controls that term. And to say we're independent Grange, I'm not quite sure how that plays into it, but to be independent means that you're not afforded whatever this category is in terms of, that doesn't do you any good either, I don't think.
Okay, so taking that, our fair, I'm kind of just getting the feeling here that we're not going to be able to show no matter what we're doing here, but
Right.
if we're not able to show as Standish Grange because of the state of California being frozen with this national thing, does that also make it so the other Granges can't show?
Well, that's a good question, and
No.
my feeling of it is that it very likely could,